My trip to Sri Lanka became a turning point in my life. I was kidnapped by an armed gang in a remote forest, where I discovered I wasn't alone. I was imprisoned with another man who had spent years in that hell. Together, we planned our escape from that horrific prison, facing unimaginable dangers, from severe injuries to brutal chases through the dark heart of the jungle. After a journey filled with terror and suffering, we finally managed to return to civilization, where I regained my freedom and found my way back to my loved ones after more than a year of absence. Episode 1. I advise you to listen to the story before bedtime. Put on your headphones, turn off the lights, close your eyes, and then plunge into the story. If you are interested in enjoying people's stories, then this channel is for you. So if you are interested, explore a lot of exciting stories and subscribe to the Northern Stories channel to settle on new, more fascinating stories. Let's go. I did not expect my tourist trip to turn into an endless nightmare. My name is Jothan Wilson, an American 35 years old. I love to travel and explore new places. This year, I decided to visit Sri Lanka, a small Asian island famous for its natural beauty and dense forests. Things were going wonderfully. I enjoyed the golden beaches, the taste of the famous Sri Lankan tea, and visited some ancient temples. But I did not realize that my life was about to change forever in one of those forests. At first, the trip was going exactly as I had planned. The beaches were enchanting. The food was delicious in a way I had not expected, and the Sri Lankan people were friendly and hospitable. Each day offered me something new to explore, a temple or a waterfall, or a breathtaking natural scene. The trip was going smoothly, but on the sixth day, I decided to stray from the traditional tourist destinations and embark on an adventure of my own, an adventure I had no idea would turn my life upside down. I rented a small car, packed a backpack with some water and snacks, and set off toward one of the forests I had heard about from a local resident. It was an abandoned road, filled with sharp turns and dense trees that formed an arch over the road, giving it a tunnel-like appearance. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, and there was something mysterious and exciting about it, as if it hid deep secrets that had not been trodden by human feet for a long time. At first, the feeling of loneliness enhanced my sense of adventure. The road was narrow and filled with small stones that made the car shake beneath my feet. Nevertheless, I was enjoying the tranquility I had never experienced before. There was something comforting about the isolation of the forest, away from noise and technology. But as time passed, a sense of unease began to creep in. I no longer saw any signs or markers indicating that I was on the right path, and the further I went, the denser the trees became, and the sky above me grew darker. After an hour of driving on this desolate road, I started to feel that I had strayed too far. I was supposed to have returned to the main road a while ago, but there was no indication of another road nearby. I began to think about turning back, but curiosity was stronger than me. I felt that I was close to discovering something I didn't know what it was, but I had a strong feeling it was worth the risk. Then, what I never expected happened. Suddenly, without warning, a group of men emerged from the trees, shouting in a language I didn't understand. I didn't think I was in danger at first. Perhaps they were just farmers or villagers needing help. I slowed the car and opened the window a little, but before I could say anything, they violently attacked the car. One of them smashed the windshield with the butt of a rifle, while the others opened the doors and dragged me out. A single moment was enough to turn my feelings from curiosity to sheer terror. I was in a situation I was completely unprepared for. I felt as if the world around me was slowing down. Everything was happening very slowly, as if I were in a disturbing dream from which I couldn't wake up. I tried to resist, I tried to scream, but they were much stronger than I had imagined. They were well trained in control, and I was just a simple tourist caught in their trap by bad luck. After they overpowered me, they violently tied my hands behind my back and then covered my face with a rough black cloth. I couldn't see anything. All I could hear was my quickening breath and the sound of their heavy footsteps on the ground. Then I heard the sound of my car's engine starting up again. They threw me into the back seat, and the car began to move quickly. I had no idea where they were taking me, and my heart was pounding wildly, as if it wanted to escape from my chest. In those first moments, all my thoughts were focused on escaping. I tried to move my hands slowly to see if I could loosen the bindings, but the restraints were too tight. Then I tried to listen carefully to the sound of the road, but the noise in my head was deafening. Everything around me felt like part of an endless nightmare. After some time, fear began to turn into slow despair. I had no means to contact the outside world. I had no idea where they were taking me or what they would do to me. I felt completely isolated, as if I had already become part of this dark forest that had swallowed me. The car started to descend on sharp turns, and I felt like we were driving on a rough and unpaved road. I couldn't distinguish time, but it seemed to me that we had been driving for long hours. Finally, the car stopped. They pulled me out of it violently, and dragged me along a path filled with mud and stones. I stumbled with every step, and whenever I fell to the ground, they would kick and yell at me. I could only hear their angry voices in a language I didn't understand at all. They took me somewhere, and I felt the air become colder and more humid, the smell of mold and dust suffocating me. I was forced to sit on the ground, and I heard a door slammed shut behind me. After a few moments, they removed the cloth from my face, and I found myself in a small room with decaying walls, with only one small window that barely allowed light to pass through. The room was almost empty, with nothing in it except an old metal bed covered with a tattered blanket. I looked around, trying to comprehend what was happening. I was in complete shock. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. There were hundreds of questions swirling in my head, but I had no answers. I felt loneliness and fear like I had never felt before. It wasn't long before two men came in. They were wearing tattered clothes, and their faces were harsh and expressionless. They didn't speak to me. One of them just grabbed me while the other started hitting me with a wooden stick on my back and legs. The pain was unbearable. I felt like my bones would break at any moment. I didn't understand why they were doing that. I didn't understand what they wanted from me. The blows kept coming mercilessly, and silence was the only thing they held on to, as if my torture was just a daily routine unworthy of even a single word. After what seemed like hours of beating, they finally left me, exiting the room without uttering a word. I was writhing in pain on the floor, my body covered in bruises, and blood was oozing from open wounds. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I would survive until the next day. All I could do was cry quietly, trying to stifle my voice so I wouldn't provoke their anger again. As the days passed, I began to live in a terrifying routine. They would come every day at almost the same time, torturing me in different ways. Sometimes it was beating, and sometimes they would leave me without food or water for long hours. They had no clear demands, and there was no communication. They treated me like an animal caged in a cage, and I was gradually losing my ability to think rationally. The nights were the worst. The pain kept me from sleeping, and when I finally managed to close my eyes, nightmares would wake me up. I dreamed that I was escaping, but each time I was caught again and returned to this hell. I couldn't distinguish between reality and nightmare. Everything seemed like part of a long and painful dream. With each passing day, I was losing a part of myself. I no longer felt like the same person who came to Sri Lanka seeking adventure. I had become just a ghost, wandering in this cold prison. As the days passed slowly, every minute in that prison meant new torment for me. I had no way to tell the time, but I felt as if I had spent months in this hell. Every day was like the one before, a series of pain, loss, and despair. They treated me as if I were nothing, just a body receiving blows and orders. One day, while I was sitting on the ground trying to gather my shattered self after a new session of torture, I heard a new voice, a voice I had never heard before in this place. It was a faint whisper coming from the corner of the room. I turned cautiously to see the source of the sound, and for the first time, I saw my fellow prisoner, Michael. Michael looked like a ghost, a thin body and a weary face marked by the pallor of death. He was sitting in the shadows, as if trying to hide himself from view, but his eyes sparkled with a strange glimmer. His eyes spoke in languages I did not understand, filled with suffering and fear, but also with hope. We hesitated to speak at first, both of us wary of each other. I didn't know if I could trust him, or if he was just part of another psychological game by the gang. But over time, the barrier between us began to crumble. We were living in the same hell, and each of us saw in the other a reflection of what we were experiencing. Michael had been there for 6 years, and that was a shock to me. 6 years of isolation, torture, and fear. I couldn't imagine how he managed to keep his mind intact all this time. When I asked him how he had managed to stay alive, he replied in a weak voice, "Hope. Hope is the only thing that keeps me alive." Michael spoke of hope as if it were a tangible thing you could touch, but he knew well that hope in a place like this could be deceptive. It could be closer to poison than medicine. Yet he clung to it, and that was what kept him going. As the days passed, we began to talk more. I was learning a lot from him about life in this prison, about the gang that held us captive, and about the other people who had been here before me. He told me that the gang was not just a group of ordinary criminals, but an organized network exploiting the chaos in the area to commit their crimes. They targeted wealthy tourists like me, who came to Sri Lanka seeking adventure, only to end up in this dark prison. Michael told me about some people who had been here before me. Some died under torture, while others were released after paying a huge ransom. But there were those whom no one could pay a ransom for, or perhaps the world had forgotten them. They had been living in this hell for years, until they lost all hope of salvation. There was a German man named Hans, who had been here for over 10 years. No one knew why his ransom had not been paid, or perhaps his family had paid it but the gang decided to keep him for some reason. Hans lived in a dark corner of the prison, hardly moving, as if he had become part of the decaying walls. The more I heard these stories, the closer I felt to madness. I couldn't imagine spending years here like them. I knew that if I stayed here too long, I would lose everything, my mind, my spirit, and even my will to live. I needed to escape, at any cost. One night, while Michael and I were talking softly, he leaned closer and said, "We have to escape from here. I can't stay here any longer, and you won't last if you stay here for more years. We have only one chance, and we have to take it." The idea of escaping seemed impossible. How could we escape from this prison that no one knew the location of? We were in the middle of a dense forest, surrounded by armed guards, and we had no means to defend ourselves or even survive outside. But Michael was determined. He told me he had been watching the guards for years and had begun to understand their movement patterns. There was one moment at night when the number of guards decreased. We could try to escape then. The plan was simple. We would wait until midnight, when the guards were exhausted, and try to escape through one of the small windows in the room where we were held. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was our only chance. That night I couldn't sleep. I could hear my heartbeat clearly, and my thoughts were racing through all the possible scenarios. I knew that failure meant death, but success meant freedom, and perhaps life anew. I had no other choice. I knew this was the moment I had to seize. At exactly midnight, Michael signaled to me that the time had come. My breaths quickened, and my heart raced. We moved slowly, trying not to make any noise. The guards were sitting outside, exchanging quiet conversations, and they didn't seem to be paying attention. With Michael's help, I managed to reach the small window. The window was very narrow, barely enough for my body to pass through. I began to climb with difficulty, my hands shaking from the tension. As soon as I got out of the window, I felt the cold air hitting my face. It was a strange feeling, a mix of fear and freedom. But before I could think about the next step, I heard the sound of fast footsteps approaching. I turned to find a guard standing next to us, his gaze filled with anger and surprise. We didn't have time to think. We started running as fast as we could toward the forest, the guard shouting and calling for the other guards. Episode 2? Available in the channel.